will be switched over. That's the only change.
Now, disconnections, I don't think is the right word though, Randy. We know you're not going to cut and sever the line between the two. But the problem is what you're saying. In effect, the valves are going to be turned off in Bessemer, turned on in this new line, and Bessemer's going to sit back. And so then we believe we become disenfranchised, that we're no longer part of this water sale game.
So my question was, and just to remind me of the figures, how much, because as I recall, the overall driving point of this entire line is to be able to save the people of Ironwood Township money.
Correct.
So how much is it going to cost to bring the water from Wakefield to Ironwood Township again? What's the general idea on this project?
Looking about $2.6 million.
And neither one, Bessemer system or the Wakefield system, is a guaranteed bet for 40 years. But we're going to spend $2.some million to hope Wakefield has the capacity to do it.
I don't think you want to use the word hope.
Well, then a guarantee from 40-year capacity then is what would be the only way to remove the word hope, I think, isn't it?
We also need to guarantee the lower rates for the future. We're not getting stuck purchasing again. We're going with great choice here.
And
How do you know that, though, Kim? Has a complete comparison been done between the costs incurred of running a new line and what it would cost to buy from Bessemer?
Yes, Randy has found the first.
We presented it to your council.
What we've seen, Randy, were the total costs of the 4 different options. But that didn't include a comparison of the cost of the line plus interest and so forth compared to purchasing from Bessemer at a supposed different rate.
We
presented
to your council that night at the $4.95 rate how much Ironwood Township would save.
And we've come down off the $4.95 rate based on
we didn't have it at the time.
Exactly, and that's what I'm asking. Do we really know what the true cost is today?
We don't know your terms and conditions either.
Well, we've included them in the letter of the law.
I didn't see them. They're not in there.
Well, not terms and conditions.
No, it's depending on terms, length of contract, refinancing of existing debt. It doesn't say anything about. I'd like to make a comment though. I've been on this Louis Big Range Water Authority for 11 years. 2 years prior to that, I sat in the audience. And when I got on this board, I committed myself to the regional water system that the Louis Big Range Water Authority and rural development was developing here. And that was to bring water from Wakefield east or west to the Ironwood Township line, that each one would have a system and a source. Wakefield would have a water system, and they'd have the Chicago line as a source. Bessemer would have a water system and Stone Road treatment plant in Wellfield as a source. Ironwood Township would have a system, and they would have a source. We were going to drill in the same well, aquifer as Ironwood, but DEQ in the law was true because of the Water Extraction Act. Said we had to be 1,340 feet away from their pump, and that took us out of the water source. So that's the reason we're over at Bessemer. But then the idea of the whole system was to make sure everybody could back up everybody. Now, if we don't go to with that line, we have to rely on one source. That would be Bessemer to supply Ironwood Township and Wakefield. And when you talk Wakefield, you're talking Indian Head, Blackjack, Ramsey, and we're not just talking Wakefield. And then we have to depend on Bessemer to back up everybody. And we don't have any proof that Bessemer can back up anybody longer than 7 to 10 days. And if they have a water table problem or a contamination problem, then we have nothing. But the regional water system would be complete with this line from Wakefield. And we have to keep the water purchase thing out of this. This is a separate thing. That the Wakefield line to Ironwood Township would allow redundancy, would allow backup from Wakefield, Ironwood Township to Wakefield, Wakefield to Ironwood. And I can't see where you're disenfranchised at all. We have $30 million tied up in this project at the moment. And Gene's been on it 23 years. And in my own mind, I cannot vote not to go through because we like the completion of the regional water system.
Let me ask about the redundancy. We just ran the test between Wakefield and Bessemer, and we're able to back up each other.
How long?
I don't know, I'm not the engineer. With regards to Ironwood Township, when the new line was put in the other year on Lake Street, a tie-in to the old City of Ironwood water main still exists, does it not?
I think in 3 places, doesn't it?
Okay, so if we're talking about redundancy and backups and so forth, if something happens to Wakefield, Bessemer for a period of time would be able to supply Wakefield. If something happened to Bessemer, where water couldn't get to Ironwood Township, Ironwood is available to supply them, are they not?
Yes, Ironwood could supply, with this line through, Ironwood could back up the entire Gogebic Range regional water system.
And the big thing that the state was looking at when I talked to Doug Pasco, when they had the big Ironwood water break and their tanks bleeded out, they needed water and they couldn't pull it from our side. That's Doug's big thing with this. They wanted to be able, Ironwood is in a critical situation with a huge water main break. They drove drew their tanks down and they wanted to take water from this end and they couldn't do it. And Doug says that would allow Bessemer and Wakefield to back up Ironwood. That was one of Doug's comments to this thing.
But John, I just wanted you to know why, as chairman of this group, why I'm for that line. I'm not even thinking of the purchase of water from Ironwood Town. I'm thinking of the complete regional water system.
And I appreciate that, Walt. Obviously, Bessemer doesn't agree with that philosophy.
I know that. I understand that. But,
correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe I can look to the audience for Neil on this. It is impossible at this point, and this is a question, is it impossible at this point, if Bessemer had a failure and couldn't supply water, for Wakefield to send water west? It is impossible for that to happen? Yes or no? I mean, if Bessemer stopped producing water tomorrow, can Wakefield back up by Bessemer?
Yes, they can.
And therefore Ironwood Township?
yes, they can. Well, for not a very long period, a couple of days, maybe.
And what's the limitation on it? Or why only a couple of days?
Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask the engineer the amount of water they can possibly pump with their. I think they're pumping 500 gallons per minute with 2 pumps, aren't they?
No.
Chicago Mine could supply back to the west.
Okay, the way the system is configured right now.
It could do it.
Okay.
It could do it.
So we have the backups in place. Like I said before, I mean, if Bessemer did have a failure or couldn't produce water for whatever reason, we can. There are pipes in the ground right now that Wakefield can supply. So the pipe the line that we're talking about now going directly from Wakefield to Ironwood Township simply bypasses the Bessemer system completely. Correct?
Right. Oh, yes.
Okay. And I guess based on that statement, how do you not understand what John was trying to say when he's saying we feel as though we're being removed from the system or being removed from
I
the...
can't buy that.
But don't we have redundancy in that respect, Walt? I mean, if we're saying that Bessemer can supply Wakefield for a period of time, Wakefield can supply Bessemer for a period of time, Wakefield, we just said, can supply Ironwood for a period of time, or Ironwood Township, and the city of Ironwood, if need be, could supply Ironwood Township. The only potential problem, if I understood a meeting or two ago, was possibly the redundancy with Grandview.
Well, I mean, why don't you want a regional water system?
I think we've got one, Walt. I think we've got a regional system the way it's set up right now.
Randy, we can't bring the volume over for Ironwood, can we?
We cannot bring Ironwood
just
back.
keep the,
We can't bring Ironwood back this way. We can't. Because it'll overflow the Bessemer tanks. And we just can't do it. There's another issue too that's always a little bit cloudy in the center here, and that's where we try to always keep the two water systems separate was the issue of water quality changes and mixing and fluoridation and all that kind of stuff too.
Right, but during emergencies, you can have that.
Yes, you can't come this way.
From the city of Ironwood.
From Bessemer, you could just crank up the plant, you can go back this way, but from the wells this way. But from Ironwood, you can't make it.
No, the design was from Wakefield, the DRW design, the pressure flow district is from Wakefield on. That's the design.
So the problems that we're talking about, the potential problems of one system failing and not being able to service its district or another system failing, the system that we have in place right now addresses that. The line that we're proposing simply takes water directly from Wakefield and brings it to Ironwood Township at a lower rate. I mean, that's essentially, I know I'm just saying that that's not the issue, but
there's a big technical thing too that you guys want to brush by all the time. And that's that pressure issue in the city of Bessemer. For a long time, there's been the desire, again, to lower pressures in Bessemer, and it's always been impossible due to the fact that we had until we got the tank out at Grandview. So now it can be done. But by bringing Wakefield water across, Ironwood, Mount Zion, we're finding Mount Joy and Mount Zion are at the same height. It's a true regional pressure system. You take Bessemer right out of the center, allow you guys to drop your pressures down, and Mount Joy and Mount Zion will float each other. If we ever tie into the Ironwood system, they'll float. I mean, without any pumping.
Yeah, how does that?
It saves money big time. It saves pumping costs big time, you know.
But how does that? You said at the beginning that we overlooked that. How does that play into this?
There always was a desire from the city of Bessemer to try to drop pressures in town, and it can't be done once the system is Mount Joy and Mount Zion are talking to each other.
But aren't there other ways to affect that same result?
No, that's just, as long as you live with your high pressures in town, that's fine, but there was always the desire to drain the tanks down more. It's been a request for many years. That cannot be done without the connection or not. And again, that's a preference thing from the city.
And a quick question to Neil, if I can. Well, how urgent of a request or how urgent of a need is it for us to drop our pressure in town? I mean, how pressing is it?
It's not. We can't, like you said, we can't be off of their lines directly. So we have to be lower no matter what, unless we had a different reservoir. But, as far as getting water from Ironwood to Wakefield, you can still do that. You just have to close the valves off and run it through. Is what it would be. Because you would overflow our system.
Okay. So if Wakefield had a failure, we would close down the proper whatevers, and Ironwood could feed Wakefield, or we could feed Wakefield. I mean, so I guess, in my opinion, I'm hearing everything that we have a regional water system right now, and the only reason to put the line from Wakefield to Ironwood Township is to save Ironwood Township money.
I think Bessemer's the one who's talking about saving money. That's, I think, the reason you're blocking this whole thing is because of money.
Well, absolutely.
Well,
Just put it out on the table.
Well, like we have. I mean, we've been pretty open to that,
And you should separate the two.
Well,
but how can you go?
Yeah.
It appears, as Glenn said, everybody can, in one way or another, can support the other, even if that includes using the city of Ironwood's water.
We may
They
may end up supplying the whole system before we're done.
Entirely possible. And you're right. This is about money.
And we may be able to supply them someday too, so it might work.
Sure.
Even though they're not a member, we have to keep them in the game.
Sure. Well, why should Bessemer lay down on this if we believe that there's a system already in place to support the redundancy aspect, and just let us, like I said, let us sit on the bench for the whole thing. The redundancy appears to be there. We're talking about Bessemer Township and Ironwood Township incurring a great deal of debt to run a new line for, at least in my opinion, for no reason.
It's to complete the regional water system.
well, I understand that.
With the backup.
I understand that's
If we were able to get Ironwood Township a water source, which we are still working on, by the way, and you know that, that's why we gave you a 3-year contract to supply them intermittently while we were looking for another water source. That's what it was all about, unless I'm wrong.
No, you're right. The initial intent was for Ironwood Township to drill their own well. That unfortunately fell through. we get the 3-year agreement. Okay, but again, now we're looking at what's going to happen in the future. We're talking as an authority of spending a couple of $1 million to run a new line that, based on the discussion tonight, doesn't appear to be needed.
We spent $30 million already, you get where we're at?
No, be careful here on this $2.6 million when they throw it around too, because 58% of that's going to be grant.
Yeah.
Okay, one day.
So be careful when you throw that number around. That debt component is critical, so that's a lot less dollars.
Well, still tax money, just spread
Oh,
over
sure.
the country.
No, it's just tax money, there's no question.
Right.
But it's our tax money, we got it.
So the question, though, I think, was, if the system is already redundant, how can we remove costs from the issue, from the element? Because the only reason to put that line
Like I
in...
said, with this line would be redundant.
Well, the discussion prior to that is...
Really, Justin's the only one that says the system's complete now. The other 4 members don't think so.
Well, I'm not saying that the system is complete by the sake of the design that was initially implemented. I'm saying from the practical purpose of one entity being able to supply another entity being able to supply a third entity, that appears to be complete. If all entities can supply each other water, the way the system is now, with any of the 3 or whatever had a failure, then it seems to be relatively redundant. That may not be exactly what the initial design or plan was, but it seems to be a redundant plan.
Well,
We need to have more options than just 2 prices. If we have the city of Iowa water, they can say it has to be this price because you can't get it from anybody else. Same thing with the city of Bessemer. You can say it's going to be $10 a gallon because you're stuck.
We're not saying that.
He's asking for possibilities, in redundancy and stuff. We need to have options.
Well, and it's a total funding package, $2.6 million assumption that maybe Bessemer might, become jerks and raise prices uncontrollably, or that maybe.
Well, already your prices are more than
Wakefield.
the city of Wakefield.
Well, of course there are going to be. There's no way we can touch Wakefield's cost.
And we have to look at our constituents as well.
No,
Just like you do, and you say you don't want to lay down to this. Well, Iron Township's been laying down and getting pushed down, and we're not going to do it anymore. Somebody has to stand up for our water users.
Well, and that's fine, Gail. But make sure we're doing the right thing when we stand
I
up.
don't think we're cutting anybody out.
There's no way that Bessemer can touch the rate per thousand that Wakefield would sell. No one's disputing that. However, when you factor in our higher rate to the cost of debt that you're going to incur and Bessemer Township is going to incur, how does that change the game?
We're not going to get to that place.
But
I know this, because just even putting our new system in and getting off of the city, the difference between what we were paying the city of Ironwood, and your rates are pretty high compared to theirs, quite a bit higher. Our debt is paid by the difference what we would have been paying the city. So we didn't have to raise rates.
Right.
And I don't anticipate, just with the little bit I know about it, that we're going to have to raise rates again to get down to Wakefield. What is that, 1.2 million in debt split by 2 communities?
One of the, we have run the operating budgets for this system without financing in place, complete. It's final scenario. So we know what it is because RD wants it that way, so we know exactly what it is. And we know what the impact is to Iron Township and the other entities at which point in time.
That was presented at the last meeting. We adopted budgets at the last meeting. Everybody had them in their possession prior to that, and
Could I be reminded of it? I mean, is that
I
possible
didn't bring
to be
it with me
reminded?
in here, but it's in the packet at the last meeting and adopted.
And
Okay, so
the overall, this is a complete package. There are many components to it other than just this debt on this one line. There's many other entities. Part of this money is going into Wakefield Township. Part of it's going on many other pieces to this, okay? Refinancing, retiring of debt, getting rid of some retention issues. We've got a final number. We do know what it is. And it was presented to you guys last week as to what those dollars are, even though in the documents you'll see also what the reduction in Vesper's debt and retainage is based on the complete package. The complete package. Take out a piece of it, then the whole picture changes. And that's why I'm saying this is a matter of the whole package financially has to be implemented.
By the way, this is Recovery and Restoration Act, and this is stimulus money. And it goes back.
So what we're trying
Get
to
it again.
So what we're trying to say here then is that, Bedford completely overlooked the items in the budget, which last week when we discussed this, we were talking about the budget, not about this specific item individually. But that be as it may, do we have a complete comparison of what it will cost to run this line through, including debt, refinancing, and all that, compared to not running it through, potentially losing the refinancing unless we have another option available to use that money and buy the water from the city of Bessemer? We don't have that. So that goes to my point with consideration and what you said earlier, Kim. How can a valid decision be made as to what is best for your constituents, at least from a financial standpoint, until we know what those numbers are?
No. There has to have been an application. I mean, you can't use that funding for other sources.
Well, we know what the Armor Township customers will see after the implementation of the total package. We know what the rate will have to be once everything is complete.
But the monies that are being used in the refinancing and all that stuff, there's been identified what the project's going to consist of. You can't go later and say, okay, let's change our mind. We're going to build water lines in Wakefield.
I don't know, can we?
That's my question.
The indication during that executive council meeting was that there might be a possibility to do that. We don't know.
The answer that day was possibly maybe.
Yeah,
That was the idea.
exactly. And that's fine.
And the question,
But we didn't know.
the question I brought up at the table is Bessemer has a lot of needs within its boundaries. Does it want to pick up that extra debt?
Extra debt for.
Before the monies, that if we don't use the money here, there's going to be an extra chunk of money that's being used over here. There's needs in Bessemer. You want to build there and pick up the debt so that happens?
If we were to build and use some of that money, then of course we would have to pick up the debt.
That's the type of allocation question that you get into if you start going into a different location.
But that had been explored. That option, what John is saying is that's an option that should be explored. And isn't, except for just now.
Any other questions? Any other discussion?
Well, I've got one totally back on this City of Wakefield issue. In the letter, John also states that he would like approved documentation and affirmation from the City of Wakefield that the relatively low, by contemporary standards, rate per 1,000 gallons with periodic cost of living adjustments will be maintained for 40 years or until approximately 2052 or 2055 as promised by the GRWA. The current contractual obligations set forth by the GRWA and the City of Wakefield appear to be an unusually long commitment. There is considerable skepticism regarding the Chicago mine site as a reliable 40-year regional water source. You have noted that the Chicago mine site and the associated fixed cost per 1,000 gallons is the GRWA quote-unquote bet for 40 years. I would like you to address that. Because this contract with the City of Wakefield, I just checked it and spoke with John Zero, goes until 2055.
Okay.
And the comment on here, it appears to be an unusual long-term commitment. Kind of surprises me because I don't believe you wrote this letter, for one thing.
I don't either.
Not in a bad way, you signed it. I don't believe a city manager such as the quality of Mr. Chattel would have made a statement like that if he has ever worked with rural development, ever. Because it is a requirement of our bond and of our funding from rural development to have a water purchase agreement for the length of term of the bonds. We've had a water purchase agreement with the City of Wakefield since 1982. They have never, ever given us any problem with this contract. They have been totally obligated and have been very professional about their obligation under this contract.
And the city is not suggesting anything different. First of all, you're right, I did not write the letter. Maybe I shouldn't, different words should have been used and I could have claimed it. But we're not asserting that there was anything improper between Wakefield and the authority or anything like that. All the city is asking is to be provided a copy of the contract.
But you have.
I'll take your word on that. Apparently, though, we don't misfile, lost, shredded, who knows what, because it's not available. So we would appreciate another copy if possible. All we're asking that based on the experience is of individuals, that a cost based on what we hear that the cost is, for the length of time that goes with some cost of living kickers in there, I understand, that is, again, a low rate for an extremely long time. So it was just, all we're asking for is to be provided a copy of the contract for review.
Well, I spoke with Mr. Chattel, he said he had a copy of the contract because he knew the terms and length. It's stated in the letter, but we can get you another copy of it.
Did I stand correctly? My understanding was that we did not have a copy.
Any comments, anybody? Any more discussion? Mike, do you have anything? Well, thank you for your presentation. John, thank you for yours.
Well, we did have a motion on the board that was started by Mr. Fellow, it was not supported.
Well, that wasn't really, I did make the motion, well, asked that I hold off
Yes.
until the discussion was over.
Yes.
So, are we at that point?
Yes, we are. Yes.
All right, then the first motion I will make is that the original offer to run as an option the pipeline through the 10 blocks of Bessemer be brought back onto the table as a possible future consideration.
I'll second that.
And I'd appreciate a roll on that one, if you don't mind.
Okay, number one. Okay, Rob. Okay, the motion is that the TRWA put the offer back on the table to run the pipe through the city streets rather than through the highway. If there's discussion on this, I would like a few points cleared up on this before we do put this on. And again, this was read in the paper, comments made by Neil Nelson, their lead man, that the city infrastructure underneath these streets that we plan to go on was in very bad shape, and that if the GRWA went through and happened to nick or break one of those pipes, we'd be required to replace it. So I would like to know if that's something that's going to be part of this agreement to go back on the side streets. The other comment was made by Mr. Olson, I think, that we're giving you nothing by going on the side streets because all the streets are in good condition and that there's only 2 or 3 blocks that you would actually benefit by us going back on the side streets.
All is a bit of a stretch, although a few of those streets are in pretty good shape, yes.
Okay, I'm going to roll call this one. Quinto.
No.
Song.
No.
Canal.
No.
Mattson.
No.
Smith.
No.
Rickard.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Pavlovich.
Yes.
Pickup. Absent. Fellow.
Yes.
Ralph.
No.
Six no's, 4 yes.
Then if I may, well, make a second motion that we authorize the administrator to contact proper authorities to determine if the funding could be used for alternative sources, for alternative projects.
Could I have a second?
I'll support that.
All right, We just need a voice vote.
Yeah, what's going on?
Would you mind doing a roll on that also?
All right, requesting the roll, like roll call, please.
Okay, April.
No.
Pickup. Okay, Anderson.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Bernard.
Yes.
Grenville.
Yes.
Philip.
Yes.
Pavlich.
Yes.
Rickard.
Yes.
Mattson.
No.
Song.
Yes.
Okay, to those 8 yes, I will do that now.